Hi there everyone, my name is Barbara Bitela, and I'm here today with my friend John Ludwig. John Ludwig became my friend 8 or 9 years ago, 2004. And when John became my friend, I was temping at a property management company. John was telling me his story about how he survived World War II Shanghai, and we decided to write the story. And the book, as a result, was called Full Moon Morning, a Shanghai survivor's story. And I have to tell you that the joy that working with John brought me, the hard work that it brought me, the wonderful challenge that it brought me, I'm very pleased with the book. But I'm even more amazed at God's timing, because John is here and alive, really at God's hand. His life has been harrowing. May I introduce John Ludwig?
Hi, my name is John Ludwig. I'm here to tell a story about the Shanghaiers. Most people that are grown up in the last 15, 20 years don't know anything about the Shanghaiers. These were people that were escaping Hitler's Nazi Germany in 37, 38 and fled over to Shanghai, China. They opened the country to the Jews, and we decided we had a future over there which would be better than Nazi Germany.
John, if I may,
Yeah,
let's start with how. You were in Halle in Germany.
Halle, Germany.
Yes, and your father was in the Buchenwald concentration camp. It's called Buchenwald?
Not that, because I wanted to explain to him how he got to Buchenwald, because remember when the Nazi officer came to the door
Yes.
and arrested him
Yes.
and his brother, then we didn't see him for 6 months. We found out he was in Buchenwald.
Right. Now, wasn't that the time where he was supposed to be in a show there? He was going to be an actor, wasn't he? And he didn't get to do the show?
No, he was a part actor.
Part actor.
Most of it, he had a shop, which was an oven shop, repaired ovens and made furniture.
You were telling me that he liked John Wayne. This was one of the big deals. What was it, do you think, that your father saw in John Wayne?
He saw a plain man became a movie star and got real popular through the movies. And my father at that time was very popular in Germany. He had a stove shop, he had a cabinet shop, and he went to a lot of people's houses and built the stoves. At that time they had those wood-burning stoves and cabinets. Yeah.
But he had a passion to act. He really wanted to be in front of an audience.
He loved to act, so he was a part-time actor, yes.
But Wayne was his idol, yes?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that
We
very
all have-
vividly.
We all have idols.
Mr. Ludwig, you're one of my heroes too. So they arrested him in front of you.
Yeah, I went to the door and I saw this big giant. To me, he looked like a giant. He was 6'4".
How old were you?
I was 6. And at that time, he asked if my dad was home. I said yes, so I called my dad. He talked to the Nazi officer that was outside, and he came back in and he said to my mother, honey, I'll be right back. After that, we didn't see him for 6 months.
And when he left you, he looked very physical and very healthy. But when he returned, what was your first impression?
All his hair was cut off, and the first thing I said to my dad, you don't have any hair.
When did he tell you that it was time that you had to flee? You had a choice either to wait here and risk going back to camp with him, or go to Shanghai. When did he get the tickets for the Potsdam? How did that explain how you got on the ship to go to Shanghai?
After he left the first time and we didn't see him, we found out that he was one of the builders of the concentration camp, Buchenwald. When it was finished, they gave him and his brother, my uncle, a chance to leave the country with one suitcase apiece and leave the shop, our house, and everything there.
And that was left to the Third Reich. You lost everything.
That was Nazi
They just
Germany,
took it.
yeah.
Okay, so now you're boarding the ship that is taking you from, what port did you leave?
We left from Hamburg.
And then didn't you make a stop in Bombay before you got to Shanghai?
That was on the way to Shanghai, yes.
What happened in Bombay?
We stopped there for a couple days, and we had a lot of visitors from Bombay coming up, and we had one gentleman that stopped by, and he asked my dad if he could buy me. So my dad got so mad that he almost threw him overboard.
I bet.
Yeah.
What did he want to buy you, as a servant?
Either servant or a slave, or they were selling people at that
my
time.
goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. So now your father fortunately didn't get in any trouble for defending you, which was good. And then
No.
you guys landed, when you got off the ship, you landed at the port of Shanghai.
Yes.
Near the Bund.
Right by the Bund.
Yeah.
That's the first thing we saw was the Bund.
And that's the river that runs.
Along the Yangtze River. Yeah.
And you got out, and what were you greeted by? What did you
Well,
see?
the first thing we saw is about 20 or 30 sampans. They called them sampans, which were actually houseboats for the Chinese that lived on and sold their wares to ships that were coming in. So they were selling us Chinese food, and Chinese statues, and everything you could think of.
So as a little boy watching this with your mom and your dad, you must have been scared but excited, because you don't
Excited.
really know what to
Yeah, I
expect.
saw so many boats there and didn't know until my dad explained to me what they were doing. Yeah.
So your father, if the paperwork I remember correctly, he registered and became a movie projector person where he was running the film in the movie houses.
Yes.
And one of his heroes was John Wayne, wasn't it?
Yes.
He had some interest in acting, and he really liked him, didn't he?
Yes.
He was a hero. All right, well, if he was working and your mom was helping set up house, what were you doing? Where did you register for school?
Well, we had a Jewish school, which was called the Katori School.
Now, who's Kadori?
Katori was a man from India that had a lot of investment in Shanghai, and he built a school just for the Jewish school.
So he was a benefactor for you?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so if you went to school, did you take up any of your father's traits in acting? Did you try out in any roles, or?
Oh yeah, I was always the funny clown.
Oh.
I get sentimental when I talk about this.
Weren't you a knight, and didn't a girl kiss you in front of your dad or something? Do I remember
I
that
had
right?
a couple little girlfriends.
Yeah, I bet you did. So now your father's trying to provide for you, and you're in this commune living, and then eventually you got your own little apartment that you shared with some people, isn't that
Well,
right?
as
There were
we
a
got
few?
off the boat, which actually, when I went in the service, reminded me of a boot camp. We were all in a row, and they were handing us blankets and pillows and so on. We slept 3 abreast bunk beds, and there were about 500
my.
Jews that came with me. Yeah.
How long after you landed in Shanghai did it take for your dad to get an apartment just for you and your mom and some other people to share?
Oh, we stayed in those bunk beds for at least a year and a half. And then they put us in a settlement called the International Settlement, which was Hongqiu at that time.
The Hongqiu Ghetto.
Yeah,
One of
ghetto.
the first ghettos.
Yeah.
Tell me about the flour fight with your mom when she was baking in the kitchen, and you would have these wonderful, because she was such a good cook.
She was teaching me how to bake, and she was baking a cake and rolling it out. And when she was rolling it out, she had to put a lot of flour on the table, and I took some of the flour and threw it at her, And
She threw it back at you. You had sort of a flower fight, huh?
yeah, we did.
She was a great lady. And didn't she, wasn't she really, all the people in the community at Shanghai really liked her. She was popular.
Everybody liked her because of one thing, her cooking and eating at the restaurant that they had built. Yeah.
But she was kind, you said. People
Yeah.
just genuinely took to her.
She would help anybody and everything. And what she did about getting us over to Shanghai, and because we only could carry one suitcase apiece, she had some of the money that we wanted to keep, because in Germany we were pretty wealthy. She sewed it into the lining of the coats.
Mhm. She smuggled cash in for you.
Yes.
So she didn't want the Germans.
We could live in Shanghai. We didn't know the language or anything, so we had something to sustain us. Yeah.
Now, I remember too, you were told by the bus driver who was taking you through the ghetto that there were certain things you couldn't do. For example, don't drink the water.
Oh yeah. In Shanghai, I got a lot of sicknesses. One thing was they called it Hong Kong foot, which made, if you go barefooted on the street, you catch it and your foot would swell up to 3 times the size.
Oh my. And wasn't there in Pentago? Did they have in Pentago there?
Yes.
Yes.
And at one time I got big boils on my arms that my mother had to pop with a needle. The only way we could cure that was sit in a water called Kali. It was made the water red, and it helped the skin. Oh, my mother had malaria. We had a lot of sicknesses over there, yeah.
But the community pulled together, didn't it?
They all pulled together and they helped each other.
Nice, really nice. With all the things that happened to you as a little boy, you had one friend that you had to leave behind. That was hard.
The friend that the family's son that rescued me?
Yes.
Yeah,
We have pictures of them in the book.
yes.
They kept you like their own child, didn't
Yes.
they? They took care of you, they fed you, they nurtured you, and you felt indebted to them, which is why you wanted to help them with this sort of train conspiracy.
Yes,
It must have been hard for you to leave them.
very hard, very hard.
Say
That's,
goodbye.
we got out of touch, and
I was
never
gonna
got
ask
back
you,
in-
did you
yeah.
ever hear from them again?
No,
It's good that you took the pictures.
Yeah.
It's really good that you
that's
took
the
the
only
pictures.
thing I have, yeah.
Yeah, where I really was intrigued when I met you was the tenacity of children, that during wartime, you were telling me that you would actually, when you got out of school, if there was a horrible rainstorm, your children would play. Tell me about what the children taught you, how you would play with practically nothing, what you would do.
Well, I made a lot of Chinese friends, and most of them, they had a big, what do they call them?
Dragonflies? The
what-
dragonflies?
Dragonflies. They put a string around them and let them fly, and we'd guide them around, just like a kite. Yeah. And they also had little bags, they called them, they put sand in the bags, had a feather on them, and we used to kick them with our feet back and forth.
Nice.
So,
And didn't you guys slide around in the mud a lot?
oh, Shanghai got real rainy weather, and we had puddles all over. So we had a good time just sliding in the puddles and playing.
Simple
Yeah.
time, right?
Yeah.
Well, when your father got the apartment with your mom, and you were able to share this sort of flat with some other people
In Hangzhou, yeah.
in Hangzhou Ghetto, I understand that someone new came into your life who was really not what he appeared to be. And how exactly did your family meet the Colonel?
Oh, that was a lot later. That was in 41. The Japanese had always taken over China, but they hadn't taken over Shanghai. So one day I was waking up in the morning and I heard a lot of explosions and shooting, and we were lived in a lane that we could just walk out the lane and we were in the street. And everybody said, "Get down," and we heard all the explosions and shootings, and that's when the Japanese took over Shanghai in 41.
And didn't you meet a little boy who you befriended?
There was a little boy that sat in front of the lane. He had hardly any clothes on, and the only English words he knew is, "I have no papa, no mama, no motor car."
But he touched you, didn't he? You
Yeah.
became friends?
Was a very good friend of mine. And later, a few weeks later, he got shot by the Japanese and died.
And he was on one of the wagons, wasn't he?
Yes.
That they would pick up the bodies ceremoniously down
Yes.
the lane. That must have been horrible for you to befriend
It
someone.
was at that time. This brings back some memories that I don't want to share too much.
Okay, we can go on to other things. But the reason why I brought that up was because you never lost heart, you never lost hope. You were constantly, if I remember you telling me your story, you're always talking to God.
Yes.
And so as you were talking to God during this time and praying, you were praying for the simplest things, and you got a new friend later. So tell me first about the Colonel, what he did with your family, and then lead us to the point where you were digging your own grave. So take us through that.
Well, as the Japanese took over Shanghai, they had all their troops around there, and there was a colonel that had befriended my father, and we invited him over for dinner like a house guest, and he was always welcome. He'd bring us food because we didn't have much food to eat, and what we didn't really know, or what my dad didn't know, is that he was interested in me more than my family. So at a later date, my father had to work, do something, so he was an money exchanger, which meant from Japanese money to Chinese money, from Chinese money to American money, back and forth, and that's how he made a living. And at some time, the colonel accused my father of cheating a person, so he took us to court. We went to court, and they found my dad guilty, and they put him and my mother in jail. And the colonel took me into his quarters at that time.
Now, when you were staying with the Colonel, he had routine things for you to do, like cleaning and that sort of thing?
Yes,
You
I
were
was
sort of
like
his
a
assistant?
servant,
or a servant?
to the colonel, yeah.
Mhm.
The colonel was an alcoholic. He drank every night, and he came back, he was drunk, and one night he tried to touch me, and I was really mad. The colonel wasn't any taller than I was, and we had a little struggle, and I saw usually the Japanese officers had those bayonets in the corner. I got a hold of the bayonet and stabbed him.
And then you tried to escape in the dark, but you were subsequently
I ran
arrested.
through the barracks, and the Japanese caught me.
Mhm. And then what happened?
Well, they marked me for trial, guilty, and I was marked for execution with several other Chinese.
So they led you and some other Chinese out to dig your own graves at that time, is that right?
We had to dig our own little grave. We didn't know what it was at first, and all of a sudden I heard shots fired, and then I blanked out. Apparently I was hit in the side of the head and passed out in the hole of what we dug. A Chinese couple that were looking for their brother, who was also marked for execution, saw me, and they found I was still alive, so they took me in, and they lived on the sampan, which is a houseboat. And I stayed there with them. They had a hollowed out ceiling, which was actually meant for their brother, and they found out the brother was dead.
So they hollowed out this thing really to sort of keep the brother safe, and they were
Safe,
learning a little bit about the spy business of what was going on,
Yeah.
if I remember at that time. And the son befriended you because he spoke a little
The
English.
family that found me
Mhm.
had a daughter and a son.
Right, and we have pictures of that in the book.
Yes. And the son was a couple years older than I was, and he was in the Chinese underground.
At that time, the Chinese underground was trying to get weapons and help that sort of oppression of the Japanese.
Yes.
And if I remember, based on the story in the book, the two of you got in a little trouble trying to lay some dynamite on some railroad tracks.
That's right.
So what happened?
We heard, because the daughter was also a spy, and she got information from the Japanese, and we found out there was a troop train coming in. So me and my friend were going to blow up the train.
But it didn't blow, did it?
Oh.
And they saw you, and you had to think really quick, didn't you?
When they found us, they chased us, and we ran all through the alleys. Shanghai had a lot of alleys, and at that time they had these opium dens,
Oh, what happened?
which the rich Chinese would go in there, sit all day and smoke opium and get high. And most of the rich Chinese, they had these big, looked like a dress, but it was just a big
The
gown.
tunic, yeah.
And I hid under.
You hid under the tunic while they're smoking this opium and the soldiers are looking for you.
That's right.
Unbelievable, very innovative. This colonel really ruined you. I mean, he scarred you, he scared you,
Yeah.
he took away everything, he took away your family, he took away your hope, and you felt terrible about stabbing him. You felt, I remember you telling me you were leaving there and you felt really bad, and you asked for forgiveness, which was
Because I didn't even know if he lived or died, because I ran out of there.
right. They never
Yeah.
told you.
They never told me. No.
Your innocence was taken from you in many ways. You
Well, I
didn't
don't-
get to be a little boy, you didn't get to be really a young teenager, you
Oh,
didn't get to go to the prom, you didn't get to drive.
No.
A lot of the
No,
normal,
all the normal childish what you had, I never had. Yeah.
and yet you were always happy.
Yeah. I was always outgoing, like the parts I played in school, the clown, something. I have pictures of me being a clown in Shanghai. Yeah.
So now, as you're learning about this oppression and you're seeing this sort of, really this war unfolding right before your eyes, you're now an orphan, separated from your parents.
Yes.
What happened when the Americans finally helped?
Well, when the war was over, the Americans came over and freed us. I got back together with my parents. They were all right.
How'd that happen? Tell us about how that unfolded.
Well, I had a good friend who was a Russian, which we had a lot of Russians over there.
Russian
They
Jews.
called them White Russians. And he was a really good friend to us. We always went over for dinner, and he came over to our house for dinner. And he actually helped my parents and me get back together.
And were your parents surprised to see you alive
Oh
and
yeah,
well?
they didn't know where I was, and I didn't know where they were, so we were really surprised to
That was some
get
reunion.
back together.
Yeah, yeah. Now you leave Shanghai with your parents and you settle in San Francisco.
When we came over from Shanghai, we landed in San Francisco. I went to school there. I was just speaking Pidgin English they called it, because I didn't know that much. And my actual German name was Dieter, and in English they always called it Dieter. And every time the kids would kid me and call me Dieter, and I had to do a lot of fighting.
I bet. And you served our nation with dignity. What branch of the service were you in?
I was actually in the Air Force, and I was in for 4 years active and 6 years reserve. I told them that I spoke 3 languages, but what they did, they sent me to Thule, Greenland.
And what happened in Greenland? Tell that story.
Greenland is the northernmost base in the world, close to Russia. And we had 6 months of daylight, 6 months of all night. It got 60 below zero, and some of the windstorms were 150 miles an hour at that time. We lived in, looked like refrigerator barracks that were, from the cool that heated us, and we were all right. But I was a maintenance, heavy-duty maintenance at that time, and we were fixing the snow plows that would keep the runway clear from the snow so the airplanes could land.
Didn't you pick up a trait from your father, though, because he could fix anything or make anything? Didn't you fix something for the service, if I remember, something to do with the radio?
Well, what we did is 3 of us got together and we fixed a radio that would shortwave to San Francisco.
Nice, you could talk to your mom.
And they had me in the paper.
Yes. So now you come back from serving and you are a taxi driver in the Bay Area and you want to get Gerald Ford's autograph.
Well, I was a lot of things in a lot of different jobs, but one was I was a taxi driver. And I was coming down from Push Street, down Powell Street, past the St. Francis Hotel. And I saw a big crowd. And I asked one of the police friends that I knew, why the crowd? He said, well, Gerald Ford is here. He should be coming out any minute. Why don't you stand here and see? And I had some time to kill, so I said, okay. And a few minutes later, we heard a big clapping, and here came Gerald Ford out. And then we heard a big bang, and it was a shot that was fired at Gerald Ford, but was hit by somebody on her hand, so it hit the wall and hit me. So it was a ricochet bullet that hit me in the groin.
And then they took you to the hospital, didn't they?
They took me to the hospital, examined, said everything was okay, and at that time I was living in this little hotel, and the White House called me, and they said, sorry that you got taken the bullet, is there anything we can do for you? I says, yeah, I'd like to shake Ford's hand because I knew he was coming back a week later. Mm-hmm. And they said, we'll call you back. They called me and said, he's going to be real busy, he won't be able to shake your hand, but he's going to send you a letter.
Oh, that's nice.
So at the time when he did come back, I was walking back down, and one of the Chronicle at that time reporters said, aren't you the one that got hit with a bullet? I said, yeah. He said, well, can we have a few words? I said, well, the hell with Ford. He wouldn't shake my hand. So that was the story there.
But didn't you get a letter from the White House?
I did get a letter signed by President Ford.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I threw it away or something. I didn't care about it.
If anyone wants to learn a little bit more about Shanghai, what are the 2 videos that you might recommend? The 2 videos that you think really capture what happened?
One was the port of no resort.
Okay.
And there was another, I just can't think of it right now.
So there's two.
Yeah.
There's two. When we met, do you remember how difficult it was for you to, at times, to recall, like it is now, you get very emotional about things. We had to go down memory lane for you. Do you remember some of those interviews, and of those interviews that you and I did together, what is the thing that you really take away about your mom and your dad and how utterly amazing they were when you were a kid? What are the things that they did to uplift you?
Well, my mother was a fantastic cook. So in Shanghai, she used to cook for all kinds of people. And we opened up a little restaurant that she would cook, and well, everybody would go over there and have her home cooking.
Really fit in, really fit in. And how old was your mom when she married your dad?
She was, I think, 18 at that time, very young.
And your dad, when he was kind of learning to be an actor a little bit, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was part-time actor for side movies. I think he had a role in The Blue Angel with Marlene Dietrich.
How lovely.
Yeah.
He was so adaptable. He was able to do anything just to
Oh
make a
yeah,
living.
he like I was telling you, you give him a piece of wood and he'd make a cabinet. Actually, that's how he met my mother, because she worked in a chocolate shop. And my father,
That's the picture we have in here, isn't it? Where she's in the,
yeah,
in
that's
the,
right.
yeah, where she's.
And my father had a sweet tooth, so he always went by there, bought some candy, and that's how he met his wife, my mother.
When your father was sick in the Bay Area, we can, you don't have to talk about this if you don't
Yeah,
want to, but he had quite a turnout for his friends, didn't he?
He worked himself up. He worked in a hospital and he became an LVN. He worked himself up to that. At a later date, he had diabetes, and he had a little sore on his leg. And at that time, diabetes was not that well known. They tried to fix that wound on his leg and never could. Finally, it turned into gangrene, and they had to amputate one leg and then the other leg.
You told me, yeah.
So it was just pitiful.
But even though he was sitting in a chair, he still had his vigor, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
And when he finally did pass away, tell us a little bit about how the community turned out for this man, the friends, the lines. I remember you telling me it was just,
There was,
You were
when
surprised.
when we had the funeral, there must have been 400 or 500 people.
your family touched the lives of many in the Bay Area.
Yeah. And a lot of them came from Shanghai.
Have you ever met anybody who's survived Shanghai? Here in either in the Bay Area or here?
Oh, when we came over from Shanghai into San Francisco, there was quite a group of us, and they would meet for every holiday or birthday or something. They would go to a different person's house. So we'd have a place to go every week, 2 or 3 times, in different days. But nobody else, I think, since I'm 80 and everybody was older than me.
Nobody on Facebook? No Shanghai reunion on Facebook? You might want to check.
They had a lot of Shanghai reunions, but I never joined in any of these. I was always, I should have got in touch with people. And remember when we looked on the internet, we saw a lot of...
Yes, I remember.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah.
Germany sent me a letter saying, we will send you a ticket, you can come over, it was Crystal Night, and we will pay for a week for you to stay here, talk about everything, visit Buchenwald, which I did.
This was later when you were a grown-up.
Yep. And I took a friend in San Francisco, and we both went to Germany, and they treated us like kings, yeah. And I went to Buchenwald, which my dad was build it, or helped build it, and I was seeing the torture chambers, the knives that they would cut the people with, and so on and so forth. They had a butcher of a surgeon that would cut out, while they were still alive, parts of their heart and liver and stuff like that. I actually saw these instruments, yeah.
Who was your friend that went with you?
Lorenzo Boston. I met him when I was working in a hotel. He was working at the same time. He was black fella, but he was like my brother. He was the nicest person.
Full Moon Morning, a Shanghai survivor story. At first I didn't have a title for it. It was called Shanghai Survivor Story. That was the working title when I started my draft, and I was conducting taped interviews with John, taking a lot of notes, going to the library. In those days, I didn't have high-speed internet, and so as a result, I had to do a lot of work in the library. So it became kind of a part-time job for me to get the right kind of beats together to tell the story and the narrative without having to vet all of these people that a lot of them were dead. So I decided to make it a fiction telling. It's inspired by events. All the events we talked about that are significant are true. John and I had decided early on we wanted to tell the story too because we thought it would be a terrific film. It's one of those films that draws you in my opinion, and one of the story arcs that is never ending, which is the tenacity of children and the human spirit. So I'm walking my dogs one morning, just an average day, and it's beautiful out, and I notice a full moon in the morning. And I said to John, I'm going to call it Full Moon Morning because that is something that speaks to fruition. And in my mind's eye, I see you looking up at the moon, this big fat face, and he had told me he was talking to God while he was waiting to be shot, even though he didn't really know what was going on. He's praying, and he's shot. So I called it Full Moon Morning, and I later learned almost 10 years later now, because I started this process in 2003, it's 2013 now, I learned later that the day that Gerald Ford was shot was a full moon in the morning. I didn't know that.
No.
Yeah, I found out later that that was the weather that day. So I'm very glad that I listened to that particular little kiss from God, as it were. Well, in my opinion, it's been an honor and a pleasure getting to know you. It's been a very sincere gift to me to actually hear your story and write it down. And we did fictionalize the story a little bit just because some of the characters we couldn't find them to get permission.
Yeah.
And John and I decided early on that we were going to try and get someone to write the screenplay. We didn't really know how to go about that, but God's awesome and entered Debe Scott, who read the book and flew in at her own expense, on her own time, met with John and interviewed him, and she has penned the screenplay. It's called Full Moon Morning. There's two versions. There's also one called Autograph, which tells a little bit about the harrowing experience of taking a bullet in the middle of the day when you're just trying to get an autograph, and what happened subsequent. But we are now, we want to get John on camera, mostly because so few people know about the ghettos and so few people know about the Shanghaiers and the history. It was really one of the first ghettos ever probably created, and the tenacity of the children.
Yeah.
You never stopped playing, never stopped learning, never stopped praying, never stopped your faith. And here you are. How old are you now?
I'll be 80 in a week.
Be 80 in a week, and we are aggressively trying to get this man's story to feature. It's been a real pleasure and an honor doing this interview with you today. I can't thank you enough. I can't thank you enough. God bless you, brother.
Cut.